My dad, my brother, and I were playing badminton one evening, early 2020, when my brother tapped me on my shoulder and pointed down our driveway at the field. I saw what looked like an extremely tall, white, thin stick figure running through the farm field. It was running from our point of view from left to right with a slight diagonal somewhat towards us. It was running so cartoony it's hard to explain. It was taking overly exaggerated bounds and it was running fast. Even though it was about 700 feet away from us, I could tell it was unrealistically tall and fast. I remember watching it put one leg out in front of the other, and its arms doing that thing people do when they sprint. I couldn't see the details because of how far away we were, but it looked like if you were to draw a stick figure, similar to the figure on the bathroom stalls except giant and thin, or like Slender Man forgot his suit. It quickly disappeared from sight when the trees that surrounded our property obstructed our view. Both my brother and I ran down the driveway so we could keep our eyes on it. So now we stood at the end of our driveway looking around at all the farm fields, but it was just gone. Even with how fast it was going, there was no way it could have gone over the horizon in the amount of time it took us to get a better view. Eventually, my dad joined up with us at the end of the driveway. We told him what we saw, and he thought it might have been a plastic bag blowing in the wind. Except it wasn't windy at all. That's why we were playing badminton. But it's not uncommon to see garbage blowing across the farm fields out here. Anyways, what's everyone's thoughts on this? Is there an explanation for this? Has anyone else seen something similar? To start this off, I live in Oregon, stone's throw away from the Willamette River outside of Corvallis. This past summer, my family and I were constantly going out to the water to kayak and canoe. My brother and my pa decided to do an overnight 20-mile trip together in the canoe. First day goes great. They get to their camping destination on the side of the river just outside of Albany. It was a fairly wooded area with a rocky beach. They set up camp and made a fire and decided to sleep in the canoe on land. It's important to point out that my pa is an experienced outdoorsman. He's lived all over the world and has experienced tons of different animals in the wild. He's had animal encounters with bears, kangaroos, cougars, you name it. My brother and my pa woke up to some strange noises in the woods next to them, and when I say strange, it made my dad pack up camp in 5 minutes and push them back onto the water in the dead of night. As they slowly floated away, they continued to hear it. He said it sounded like screaming, but he knew it was not a human sound, and the whole time they were in the water that night, they heard it. Fast forward a month, I go out on the Willamette for a solo kayak trip to an island that's really awesome to camp at. My boyfriend was to meet me the next morning, and my brother and his family would be there the day after. Now, I'm pretty safety orientated when it comes to camping by myself, especially at a place that's frequented by boaters. I always pack my firearm just in case. I'm a small female, so it just makes me feel safe. Anyways, the first night there alone, I was in my tent asleep, and was woken up at around 3 a.m. to what sounded like someone throwing giant rocks into the river on the other side of the island. It was a very wooded island, and you could not see the other side from where I was located. I thought to myself, maybe it was just other people on the island, and tried to go back to sleep. But then I heard it again, and this time it was all around me. It was like something was throwing giant rocks every minute from different places on the river. I'd never heard anything like it before. Then I heard what sounded like an aluminum boat scraping up against the rocks on the other side of the small inlet of river I was on. I quietly looked out of my tent and saw nothing. The moon was almost full, so I could see pretty well. I thought maybe someone was night fishing, but there was nothing, and continued to hear the loud dropping noises. The next day, my boyfriend arrived. I told him about the noises, and he didn't think much of it until that night. We had been sleeping, and again, I was woken up around 3 a.m. to the same noises, the rocks being dropped into the water all around the island, and then some sort of, I don't know how to explain the noise I heard. I've searched everywhere on YouTube looking up animal noises, and I haven't found one that matches what I heard. It was almost a growl, but screaming. I've looked up every cougar noise I could find, and it wasn't that. I woke up my boyfriend because I was terrified. He heard it and he was also very scared. The noises were coming from the same bank I heard the metal noise bump up against the beach. It was loud, and then it sounded like there was two of them fighting. We again looked out the tent, and the moon was even brighter, but saw nothing, which is strange because it sounded like it was right there on the beach. The screaming was terrifying. It was like the noises my brother and my dad had heard. We did not end up going back to sleep, and just stayed up listening. The next day, my brother, his wife, and 2 children arrived. I told him about the noises, and he said that's what he had heard as well. That night, my boyfriend and I slept like rocks and didn't wake up in the middle of the night. My brother did and heard all the same noises we had. I'm not sure what we had encountered. I know it wasn't anything I can currently identify. Like I said, I've listened to all the sounds I can possibly find, and nothing matches the horrible screams and growls we heard. We have not been back to that location to camp since, but my boyfriend and I might again this summer with camera equipment to see if we can catch what we heard. I'll be sharing 3 stories, 2 of my own and 1 is from my sister. All stories take place in the forest my parents' house is in. It has been known to be the site of satanic activity. Cats found dead hanging in trees. I personally have found a giant pentagram made out of rocks in the grass, and a ritual site with rose petals and different stick formations. Now time for the stories. The first occurrence happened to me 6 years ago while I was on a hike with my ex-boyfriend. We were walking on a loop in the forest. The particular part of the trail we were walking in had very minimal tree coverage and was pretty open. A few small trees, but nothing big enough that a person could hide behind. As I was walking, I hear what sounds like a deep, guttural growl. The sound is coming from right behind my head, as if someone is growling in my ear. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I grew up in this forest, so I know we have a coyote population. I quickly whipped around ready to fight, and there was nothing there. I looked all around the surrounding forest, in the trees, etc., and there was literally nothing there. There was also no time for whoever or whatever made the noise to run to hide in the time I turned around, as the closest tree was about 10 feet away. My boyfriend asked me if I heard it too, and we cut our hike short and went home. Second occurrence also happened to me. 10 minutes from my parents' house is a giant pond that has a fallen over tree leaning against another tree, so you can climb up onto this dead tree and look at the pond. It was a classic smoke spot in high school, so my friend and I decided to make our way there one summer afternoon. We smoke, and almost immediately after we finished smoking, we both got a really bad feeling. At this point, we hear what sounds like a woman screaming. It sounds distant, and we are immediately shaken up. We start looking around to see where it was coming from, when not 1 but 2 men's voices begin chanting. At this point, the woman's screams begin changing, almost as if she's yelling with the chants. Next, we are literally running away. Things start to get really scary when the sounds completely stop. We both freeze, look at each other, and the low chanting and screaming start coming from a completely different direction and sound much closer. This continues to happen as we run away from the pond, chanting, screaming, silence, and then the voices pick up from a different area of the forest. Similarly to the last story, when we looked around the forest, we couldn't see anything. To leave the pond, you needed to hike up a hill, and nothing was visible from the top. The final and arguably scariest story happened to my sister. 5 minutes from my parents' house is a giant field overgrown with tall grasses. One night, the sun was setting and she wanted to run to the field to take pictures. When she got to the path to get to the field, she noticed that it was overgrown with thorns. Not wanting to miss the sunset, she forced her way through the denser forest separating the trail from the field. She got to the field, took her pictures, and as she turned back and began pushing her way through the forest, she heard what she describes as the most fierce, low, demonic growling she has ever heard. It was not coming from one location, it was coming from all around her. Just like when I had my experience, My sister looked all around her, all directions, and even into the trees to see if she could spot what was making the noise. There was nothing. She had an overwhelming feeling that if she ran, whatever it was would try to kill her. She decided to say out loud, "Please don't hurt me. I just want to go home," and slowly began taking small steps. This worked, and she took step after step while the growling continued until she made it back to the trail. Once she got to the trail, she began sprinting home and said that during her entire run, she felt like something was right behind her, but when she looked behind her, nothing was there. Once she made it to my parents' property line, she said the feeling of doom immediately left. So these are my 3 stories. I would love to hear people's opinions on what they think could have been happening. The forest still creeps me out to this day, and I never go out near sundown alone. It was 2015, and I'd gone camping with 3 friends. This was like the 3rd time camping ever, and we were at a pay-to-stay campground. We even were staying in a tiny cabin by a big lake, so it wasn't out in the wild. Now, back then, I used to get panic attacks, sometimes for no reason, and for some reason, despite my immense love for nature, ever since my first time camping, I would often get a panic attack when camping. I don't know why. Well, that night I had one, and it was pretty severe to the point where I'd feel like I couldn't breathe if I stayed in the cabin, but I would get scared if I stayed outside, so I had a lot of back and forth, and my poor friends put up with me. At one point, I had stepped outside with one of them, my significant other at the time, and was trying to calm down, and also wondering where to pee. My significant other had a flashlight and was leading me to a spot in the dirt at the edge of the trees between our 2 parked cars. He reasoned it was a good distance from the cabin, and yet not in the middle of the woods where some critter could catch me with my pants down, so I agreed. That's when I saw it. I can still remember. I stepped past the first car and looked between the cars towards the edge of the woods. Between the candles at the cabin and the flashlight, nearby but not directly on the site where I saw this, I saw something. A creature. It was so strange because it was silent. The creature had the general body shape of a dog, but its colors and features were more like a hyena, kind of gray and dark splotches. It stood perfectly still, peeking out behind the front of the car, so I only saw its torso and head and front legs. The thing I'll never get over is its face. It looked like it was frozen in time, with its jaws wide open and revealing sharp, bright teeth. Its eyes were looking right at me, and they appeared to be glowing, but probably just reflecting the light. Its nose wasn't wrinkled like a snarl, and there was no growling, no sound. It was the oddest thing, and it sent an instant, deep ball of dread down into my core. After I froze for a long moment, I grabbed my significant other's arm and urgently whispered for him to go back to the cabin and pulled him back. We got back in the cabin, and the other 2 friends were asleep. I don't think my significant other saw it at all. I couldn't sleep that night. With my panic and now that sight, I eventually went and slept in the car. Somehow that felt safer. It wasn't particularly large, but it was so silent and so still, almost like it wasn't breathing. But it was real and it was there. And somehow I knew there was something horribly wrong about it. This happened a while back, but I rarely tell this story, simply because everyone I tell it to thinks I'm crazy. In 2018, me, my wife, and son went camping in South Louisiana. I've always been an avid outdoorsman, and I was trying to get my son to spend time outside, as he is usually a very indoors video game kind of kid. We get to the campground, and we take a campsite that's secluded towards the rear of the campground that requires a canoe to reach. I love this campsite because you can see tons of alligators on the way, as well as bald eagles and other really cool animals. We get to the campsite through a little creek-like area. The other sides are surrounded by a lake, our own personal island. All day we fish and canoe, and me and my son play in the creek. Later in the evening, we cook on the campfire and tell stories and just talk about life. Around 1:45 or 2-ish, my wife gets tired and says they will go behind a tree to use the restroom, and then they were going to go to sleep. I said sounds good, and as they walk off, I climb into the tent to try to take some stuff out to make room. As I'm coming out, I see a flashlight by the creek, and my wife's voice rings out, "Hey Phil," followed by my son's voice, "Yeah Dad, you gotta come see this." I start heading that way, and then I hear someone moving behind me. I turn to look, and my wife and son walk up and ask me where I was heading. I told them that I heard them calling me from the opposite direction. My wife scolds me and tells me that I know my son is already sort of scared of the woods, and that scary stories shouldn't be told to him right before he sleeps. I turn around, and that light from the flashlight is gone. As we lay down, my son finally dozes off. I tell my wife that I was serious about what I heard, clear as day, and she tells me to just give it a rest. To this day, I have no clue how to explain this. I've been to this campsite several times before and after, and never experienced it again. It sends chills down my spine to think about it, and to think what I would have found had I gone down to the creek. Thankfully, I found this sub, where I feel less afraid to share my experience for fear of ridicule. Let me know what you guys think. Additionally, a few people sent messages thinking someone was playing a prank on me. Here's my reasoning as to why I don't believe it's true. Number 1. First off, no one knew we were there besides our parents. I had gotten off early from work on a Friday, and it was an impromptu trip. Number 2. The voices weren't just the same as my wife and son, but my wife says my name funny. My name is Phil, and she says it like Fio. It's distinct. Number 3. During the day, it took us about 30 minutes to travel between campsites. It was a hot summer, and the creek was really low, and several times I had to get out and push. It's dangerous because so many alligators hang around there. Getting out to push with alligators is a really bad idea. They're hard to see in the day, let alone at night. Someone with a woman and child would have had to travel far, not knowing we were there, in alligator-infested waters, with the hopes of finding someone even at our campsite, and then know my name and how to pronounce it like her. My friends didn't know I was going, and if by chance one of them was out there and saw me, they don't have kids, nor do they bring their girlfriends with them. My friends would have scared me to death, then came out to meet me and laugh about it. When I told friends, they thought I was crazy, so my doubt lies heavily on the idea that it was my friends. This takes place in my hometown of Vernon, New Jersey in 2009. The town is near the northern tip of New Jersey in the Appalachian Mountains and borders New York State. I was 17 at the time and at a party at a friend's. The town is very large and divided up into different communities, most lake-based. But the one my friend's house was in was called Old Orchard. It was more development-like than a typical neighborhood, but was up a steep hill with lots of woods around it. It was a summer evening, so we spent our time outside in their backyard. Some people were drinking, but myself and the other witness were not. The backyard had a thin tree line dividing it from the lot behind it, and with leaves on the trees, it was thick enough to block your view from the yard. Well after dark, I went through the tree line and into the next lot with someone else. We walked a few steps through the trees, and they sat with their back to the tree line facing the lot, which was a large upward sloping hill with a single tree in the center with maybe 100 yards between us. The lot was bordered on the right by a road with a single street light that partially illuminated the area, and to the left there were similar tree lines bordering other properties. After sitting and talking for a while, we both fell quiet when we heard something. It was just for a moment, but it sounded like sniffing, like the sound a dog makes with its nose to the ground searching for something. I was facing the tree line bordering my friend's backyard. We could clearly hear everyone in the yard carrying on only feet away. The sniffing sound didn't continue. I glanced around behind me into the lot, saw nothing, and we continued talking. To preface the rest of the story, I want to note that northern New Jersey has a large black bear population. and in my town it was very common to see them in your yard, crossing the road, or even have them break into your home in search of food. Combine that with being someone who spent a lot of time outside and in the woods. I know what a bear looks like and how it moves and sounds, and I know what other large predators are in the area, and what I saw was none of these things. So some time passes, long enough to forget about the phantom sniffing, and then I hear it again, and the other person does as well. It's the same nose to the ground, sniffing out prey type of sound, and it's loud and seemingly coming from all around us. We can still hear the party going on, and as loud as the sniffing is, they don't seem to notice it. I look at the person I'm with, and they're frozen, with their eyes locked on something ahead of them. I turn and face into the lot as the sniffing continues, and under the tree I see the large dark outline of something. It was shaped like a bear but larger, standing about 6 feet on all fours. Its head is down to the ground and it's sniffing around under the tree, but it still makes no sense that we would be able to hear it all the way from where we were, let alone how loud it was. Then it moves forward, and that's when I'm certain it's not an animal I'm familiar with, because it puts its 2 front legs out first, and then its back legs shuffle forward in one motion like a rabbit or a kangaroo. I didn't watch for very long, but enough to see it keep shuffling forward like that a few more times. The whole time its head is to the ground, sniffing as loud as if it were breathing in our ears. Again, it was only bright enough to see a silhouette, but it appeared to have fur. I had a strong feeling that it could feel me looking at it, and if I kept watching it, it would notice me, and I didn't want that to happen. The other person and I locked eyes, grabbed each other's hands, and bolted back into the yard. No one else noticed. Most were too drunk to even know we had been gone. It was late, and I convinced some people to go inside to the living room to sleep. Other people stayed out in the yard in tents, but no one mentioned anything weird the next morning. We didn't tell anyone what had happened during the party, and the reason the other witnesses, just someone and not my friend, is because they were really just an acquaintance I had met and was trying to hook up with. I never saw them again. I don't even know their last name if I wanted to contact them and ask about it, and we didn't speak of it with each other while at the party either. Northern New Jersey is supposed to have a Bigfoot-type cryptid called Big Red Eye, and the Jersey Devil, of course, but I don't really think it fits. I posted this story once before on an old account, and I was told it was a dogman, but that also doesn't seem to fit. I've had a lot of paranormal experiences in my life, but this is the only cryptid type I've ever had. I don't know what it was, but I got the distinct feeling it was something I was not supposed to see.